That's why I like to make it super clear. Lay the tech foundation. You create one page of content for every single keyword you want to rank for. And if you're in a big niche, you're going to want to rank for thousands of keywords, and then get other websites to link back to you, which is its own kind of specific type of PR. Those are the three things that compile SEO. And any SEO company that's good will be creating content, getting links for you.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the CEO and founder of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. And if you ever need help with anything, feel free to reach out to us at Miller IP Law by just going to strategymeeting.com. Now, today is another great expert episode where we have an expert on to talk about some things that are helpful to startups and small businesses. And today's guest is Garit Boothe. Boothe, is that right?
That's right.
Okay. And we're going to talk a little bit about SEO. And we've discussed SEO a bit in the past with some other expert episodes, but this one's going to be a little bit more kind of both technology company centric and also a little bit more on the technical side of what does SEO means and some of the considerations and the ways you approach it. So a little bit more of the back end and a little bit more on the tech side as opposed to what we talked about in the past. So I'm excited to dive into it. So with that, welcome on the podcast, Garit.
Hi, Devin. Glad to be here.
So before we dive in, and we'll definitely dive in to talk a little bit about SEO, but tell everybody just, 1 or 2 minutes, a little bit about your background, why it is that you're an expert and why they should trust you and listen to your advice.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been doing SEO strictly for the past 5 years, been doing it overall the past 7, 8. And my first real experience with it was a small e-commerce company based out of here in Utah, or I believe we're both based out of. And they had an off-site blog that was, frankly, I don't know why they wanted to create a blog that wasn't a separate domain, but you see companies doing that sometimes. They weren't making any money from it. It was kind of a sunk cost. And I said, was there anything we can do here? And I was, running had my hands in a lot of different marketing pies. It was my first real marketing job. And I said, well, why don't we just take this blog and redirect it over to our main website where we sell the products? And I did it with SEO in mind, and I did it in a smart way. And it turned out making a ton of money for the company. And so I go, oh, this SEO stuff works. This is pretty cool. So I just kept, and I actually had hired an SEO agency that didn't work out as well. So I fired them, took it in-house, learned everything I could, and it was a big success. And so I was just off for the races after that. I just dug deeper and deeper. And to this day, I still love just, manipulating Google, right? One of the biggest companies in the world. And I manipulate their search engines for my clients.
No, that sounds like a fun and a kind of interesting way to get into to SEO and to get into that aspect of your business. So now let's dive into a bit of the technical expertise and talk a little bit. So, maybe a softball question, but, looking at SEO, you work a lot with, tech companies and particularly, I think a little bit with fintech, but give us an idea of if you're because a lot of our listeners are on technology, whether it's, and I work a lot with them with patents and trademarks and that, but, you take the tech company, is there anything specific or different with SEO when you're looking at it as a perspective from a tech company, as opposed to other kind of companies, whether it's services company or you're a restaurant or you're a small business or you're an e-commerce platform? Is there anything different that they should be considering when they're a tech company or in fintech?
Definitely. And sorry, I realized I didn't totally answer your question before. In my own background, as you mentioned, now I do focus exclusively on tech companies for SEO, particularly in fintech, and had the opportunity to work on some big brands in my career like Verizon and AT&T. But I've also and then I moved to fintech after that. So I've worked on huge brands, and I've also worked on sites starting from nothing. For example, launching business.org. And you definitely approach it differently, both when you're working for a big company versus a small company versus local versus national. And so there's a number of things you have to take into mind if SEO is the right fit for you and how you approach it based on who you are. So one, bottom line, are people looking for you on Google? Google has 90% of the search market share. So Bing and Yahoo and a few others exist, but really we're optimizing for Google here. And if people aren't Googling what your product or service is, don't do SEO, don't do search engine marketing of any type. So that's first. And that applies to a number of B2B niches. For example, I did a little work for an insurance API tech company. For some reason they thought SEO was for them because they'd seen all these other companies grow with it. But it turned out what they were building was just way too technical. And so I said, sorry, this isn't a good match for you. But for other companies, and you see a lot of these success stories like Gusto, right? They've grown to be this huge, payroll provider tech company. It's been a huge growth for them because people are looking at payroll terms. So that's the first baseline thing.
But let me dive in with a question a bit on that, because I mean, one thing I've always wondered, so you have everything from restaurants or mom and pop shops, right, to you have some, and more where I've wondered, and I don't know the answer, hence why I ask you, I'm generally interested, is let's say whether you're a local plumber or you're a home builder or you're landscape architect. Some of those a lot of it is word of mouth. You do it in the local area. And so how do you determine if people are searching for you, or if you should even dive into SEO? Meaning, you don't know if, hey, really, if I'm a carpenter, should I be putting my stuff online? Would that help my business? Or really, is it just going to be all the local people and it's word of mouth and referrals, and I shouldn't worry about SEO? How do you kind of go about starting to weigh that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I'd say first, if people are searching for you, then you need to find out who's searching for you. Are they the kind of people that you want to do business with? Which sometimes the people searching for your products, I know this because I've worked in lending. A lot of the people that are searching for lending solutions have terrible credit. So only 20% of those will be qualified leads. Anyways, and then what's the competition? How hard is it going to be to rank for those keywords? So like you mentioned, a local service provider. If you're a carpenter, a plumber, even an attorney, right, which is usually bound by geography, it's going to be less competitive because you only compete with those local service providers around you. So then the question is, let's say you're a local service provider. What's your budget? That's a huge factor. I know that seems really basic, but you can't really do good SEO on $500 a month unless you as the owner have that expertise. So if you go out and want to hire a consultant or an agency, you probably just would be better to do some advertising, right?
Yeah. No, I definitely get it. Now, one question I've had, and I think that starts to answer, and I'm going to follow it up, is how do you know that people are searching for you? I mean, let's say you take someone that isn't very astute, they have great in their craft. And I'm going to use a carpenter just as an example, that does woodwork. And let's say I'm really good at carpentry and I have, great. I have no idea if people are searching me, in the sense that, I know that I have people that are locally that are referring to me, or that, that I have a book of business with, home builders or others that I'm using, but I don't know if people are searching for me. So I don't know if I were to start to get into SEO or build a website or that, if it would increase my business or it'd be a time sink. And I've always wondered, because, when we built a house previously, in that we had a great carpenter, and I don't think if he has a website, it's so obscure that nobody would ever find it. I don't think he does, and he's not very technical. And I've always wondered, hey, would he be great if you were to build a website in SEO and it would at 5x his business, or would he just sink a whole bunch of money? So how do you even start to dive in and determine, whatever the industry is, as to whether people are searching for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I would start as the SEO service provider is I have tools that tell me what the search volume is. So I'd look at what you do and just see, do people Google, let's say, you're a carpenter in Morgan, Utah, people Googling Morgan, Utah carpenter. If you get 500 searches a month for that, that's not bad, because if you could rank number one for that, and you'd probably get anywhere from probably around 300 people a month to your website, 300 people a month actively searching for a carpenter. Yeah, that'll 5x your business. But for people that don't have those SEO tools that I have to be able to look that up, I'd say, you probably want to look for an SEO service provider who is in your niche. There's lots of people who focus on local SEO. That's what they call it, local SEO. So go to one of them, in their pitch, they could show you all the data, take a look at the pricing, and that's probably where you'd start, and they could give that to you for free. And of course, the best way to hire someone, and this is true for any industry, is just through referral, right? Somebody you know has done great for others. I'm sad to say that there's a lot of SEO and digital marketing providers that don't do a good job. We kind of have a bad reputation in our industry. So, you know, it's great if you can find someone who's done great for somebody like yourself.
No, and I think that that definitely makes sense. So now, kind of shifting a bit of gears, and you know, kind of to follow on to that, is one of the things we talked about, and it kind of dovetails into that. Is you have a lot of different types of businesses, right? Some of them are B2B, B2C, SaaS, which is software. You know, making or explain those acronyms for those that don't know. B2B is business to business. B2C is business to customers. So are you selling to other businesses, or are you selling direct to consumers? Is it software as a service that is, you know, basically it's a monthly subscription or otherwise using software to provide a service, or other tech specific? If you're in one of those industries, you know, how does that affect how you do the SEO, or what does that mean when you're starting to tackle or dive into this?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So kind of like we were talking about earlier, you know, if you are selling products nationally or even internationally, right? But let's stick with national.
Mhm.
You know, you're going up against anyone else who's trying to rank for that keyword. So if you're e-commerce or you're a software provider, right? You're competing against anyone else. And so that's what kind of gets back to the competitor analysis that I talked about earlier. See if
Mm.
your keywords are hard or easy. I have some clients, um, believe it or not, even though they're in industries with big players, nobody's doing SEO. And so it's really easy to rank for their keywords.
Mm.
Other places, like I can think of several different finances. For example, if you wanted to rank for anything credit card related, okay, when I was working at a finance company, Nav, I was able to rank number one nationally for the keyword business credit cards. And almost, I had to really work hard on that one. And I was my full-time dedicated job.
Mm.
You know, so ranking for number one for credit cards, forget it. Never going to happen unless you
Mm.
dedicate a whole team to it. So
Mm.
you look at the competition. Are you nationwide or are you local? What's your industry? How difficult are the keywords in your industry? And then, you know, a good service provider can guide you on how you tackle that from there.
Mm. And I think that definitely makes sense. I think that, you know, one of the things that people oftentimes, hey, I'm just SEO and it's the exact same for every industry and for every, you know, clientele. And that's part of probably the reason that sometimes you have bad reps, not to mention, you know, at least on the other side, I always get blasted by a whole bunch of spam and junk emails, and on LinkedIn and everything else, you just are bombarded. And some are probably very good at their services. And a lot of them, you look and they don't have hardly any clientele or any experience. And they're really just doing very minimalistic things that they took a course, or they figured out, or they watched YouTube and they're trying to get going. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but it gives the industry a hard to figure out who's the good ones and the bad ones, because you know they don't know enough of what they're doing to really specialize in that. So I think that that definitely makes sense, that, you know, learn what your market is, and your SEO, if you're doing it yourself or if you're hiring someone, should do some of that in analytics. So now let's get a bit into that technical side. So if you're to talk a little bit about kind of the technical side of your SEO, and kind of what that back end might mean, what kind of backlinks are or PR is, and kind of what people should start to consider to, you know, take it kind of assuming that, one, that they don't know a ton about it, and two, that they haven't hired a firm that can do it for them. Kind of what are some of the things that they should start to be aware of on the technical side?
Totally. So first off, let's talk web platforms.
Mm.
The whole point of technical SEO is just to make sure that your website is indexed in Google. In other words, that you show up. So that your
Mm.
first goal is when people Google your name, you show up. And I know that sounds super basic, but
Mm.
especially for new businesses, doesn't happen a lot of times. So first, what you want to do is get a web platform that's easy to operate. And so if you're, you know, on a shoestring budget, maybe you're a local service provider or just a tech company, just started bootstrapping, um, you know, do Wix, do Square, do one of those. They're really cheap, really easy to go. You don't have to mess with hosting or setting up, or it's very easy to set up email through. They have hookup connections with Gmail, and because your tech platform
Mm.
is the basis, right? And if you're a company with a little bit of budget, I'd say stick to WordPress. I've worked at companies who built out their own internal, what we call content management systems, CMSs, and they're horrible. and WordPress is free. So, so just get WordPress. There's plugins that you can use that give you advanced functionality, and they're different, and those will give you SEO capabilities that otherwise might take a team of developers. And so, there's a lot of things I look at in tech SEO. I'll crawl I have a number of tools that I pass a site through. How many URLs does your website have? Do you want all of them to be public facing? Is every page on your website linking to other relevant pages? Google works on a system of links. When a page shows up, the listing actually in Google comes from your code, your title tag, and your meta description in HTML. Are those completed? Do they make sense? Are they conveying a message that's going to make people want to click? So there's a whole bunch of weird nitty-gritty little things to look at on the technical side. But to be totally honest with you, you hire somebody like me, we know all that stuff. And even just a quick project, one-time project, can get you going and with a solid tech foundation. Or if you're hiring a web development or web designer, make sure they have good SEO people, making sure the SEO side of things is checked off. Most of the work when you're doing SEO, once you've laid a solid technical foundation, is creating keyword-centric content and getting other websites to link back to you. And I think, Devin, if I may, because I've thought a lot about this, this is the part of SEO where people kind of go like what? Backlinks? Well, what is that? Because if you want to, I've talked with marketing executives where they'll spend $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 a month on Google Ads because it makes sense. You pay money, you get an ad. People click on it, they show up to your website. Versus SEO is kind of like this dark art and all these weird different aspects. But again, that's why I like to make it super clear. Lay the tech foundation. You create one page of content for every single keyword you want to rank for. And if you're in a big niche, you're going to want to rank for thousands of keywords, and then get other websites to link back to you, which is its own kind of specific type of PR. Those are the three things that compile SEO. And any SEO company that's good will be creating content and getting links for you.
So now, correct me where I'm wrong. If I were to simplistically try and break down what a backlink is that's basically whether it's a hyperlink or other ways of directing people back to your website. Meaning, so let's say you wrote a great piece of content, you got it published by Forbes or New York Times or whatever the outlet is, and then they give a link back to your website. That would be a backlink that people can follow, that the internet can index or Google can index, but that people can also follow it back to your website to find out more information. Is that a fair or simple summary?
Exactly. That's perfect. Google based its whole, if you go back to the 90s and read the original Stanford PhD paper on their idea for Google, it's based on links. And even though there's been a lot of changes, that's still the platform. So the creators of Google see a link of one website to another as an editorial vote. Because if you as a content creator or as a webmaster think that somebody else is valuable enough to worthy a mention in the form of a link, that probably means you've done something right and worthy. So over the years, there's been a lot of people who try to create spam links. And if you manage a website, you'll see people trying to spam you for a link. That doesn't even really work anymore. If you go into most forums, the links that you can get from those don't really count. So there's some links that carry juice or equity, if you like, and others that don't. And as an SEO person, I know which ones do and which ones don't. But generally, if a link requires you talking to another real human, it's probably going to be valuable.
No, and I think that definitely makes sense. And now, one thing that we kind of got into that I thought was an interesting way of putting it was backlinks are really kind of a form of PR in the sense that you're trying to provide valuable content that people are going to naturally want to share or otherwise put on their website and link back to you. Is that a fair kind of, how does PR work with backlinks, or kind of or give us a bit of an explanation on that front?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, how do you build backlinks? So there's a variety of techniques for this. I'll start off with a simple one that's very common. It's been around for years. It's called guest posting. So anyone who owns a website, Devin, you've probably been swamped with people asking you for a guest post opportunity. And the reason that they do that is because they want to include a link back to their website or their client's website in the content that they provide for you.
Mm,
So the idea is, I'll provide free content for you if you link back to me. And that has become such a common and such a oversaturated technique that
mm.
now many publishers say, yeah, sure, you can write a piece of content on my website and pay me an editorial fee. So Google doesn't want you to do that, but I'm telling you, that's the way palms get greased these days.
Mm.
So you can either reach out to other websites, ask them if you can provide some content for them, or simply mention you if what your content says is relevant to what they're already talking about. And you have to do a lot of outreach. But doing that kind of guest posting or link mentioning is very, very common.
Now, one kind of flip side to that, because if I were to argue again, I don't know, against it, but if I were on the other side and I'm saying, okay, I've got a great website, we get a lot of traffic. Now I'm maybe hesitant to link to someone else because then they go off of my website, right? They go off of my page. So how do you kind of overcome that if you're trying to get the backlinks or trying to get the PR to get people to link, or, to do that linking? Because, what the worst thing is if I do a whole bunch of time and effort to get someone onto my website and then I link to somebody else's, they go off into somebody else's, they never come back, they never convert, and it creates that issue. So is there any thoughts as to how you make that balance?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And generally speaking, because I do a lot of this
Hmm.
kind of guest post outreach, the websites that are willing to allow guest posts don't care about that.
Mm,
A lot of websites, I'd say most, they don't allow anyone to guest post on them ever,
mm,
unless maybe they know you already, right? So, in terms of the traffic that you'd lose, if you look at the analytics, there's different tools you can use to see where people click and how much where traffic goes.
mm,
Generally, if you write an article, an in content article link, that's like a little blue link, not a big button or something, just a little blue link, they almost never get clicked on. So that particular concern, although I think it's extremely valid, usually it's not a problem. Most of the time, it's just that most people asking for a guest post will really write terrible content. And so that's why people say no.
mm,
I think that the best way to really go about it, though, and I gave guest posting as an easy example, is to
mhm,
create content that's so good and that's citable, link worthy, has unique data, has great design and visuals to it. Maybe you add a video to the
mm,
article too. It's so excellent in a way that nobody else on the internet has done it. When
mm.
you reach out to people in your industry who are interested in what you do, they say, wow, this is worth a link. I want people to know about this. And that's the best way of going about it. But it's very, very hard. But
Mm.
that's kind of like the holistic way of approaching it.
No, and I think that definitely makes sense because I think to your point, I think it's hard if you were to get hit up a lot of times saying, "Yeah, you can write an article, but by the time I have to read through it, I have to look at it, and then I have to make sure it fits in what it." And all of that is like it's not worth it. We either write our own content or unless it's to your point, unless you're like a blog place where you're featuring a lot of guest posts or you're providing information or you're something of that nature. But if you're just a company or commerce, you're going to say it doesn't make sense to fit in with us. So definitely just was an interesting question. Well, we're starting to wrap towards the end of the podcast. I do have one more question. And, I always say one more question. I probably have more than one more, but, if you are a startup, a small business, and you're either in the spot that you're not convinced that you should invest, or you really don't have the budget to invest in it yet, what's the best way to at least start to tackle SEO or start to get involved in this to help your business to the degree that your budget allows?
Yeah. So I'd say hire someone, and this is what I tend to always do, hire someone for a one-time project. They can do keyword research, they can do a technical audit of your website, and just make sure that you're optimized for Google. Make sure that there's a couple of different free Google programs. So first off, sign up for the Google Search Console. Anyone can do it. You can just Google Search Console. Formerly was called Webmaster Tools, and you can sign up your website for that. Get your website set up with Google Analytics. That's free. So right there, if you do those two things, um, you know, that's very helpful because Google will communicate, important information to you that way. And then, hire someone to do a quick audit, do a quick, uh, keyword research. And if it's worth pursuing, um, maybe see if you don't have the budget, tuck it away for maybe a year later when you're at a better place. Or if you can maybe just start by writing one article a month around a strategically important keyword. And that's something anyone can do.
Hmm. No, I think that's great advice. At least get to see if it's worthwhile, if you should start tucking things away, do the things that you can reasonably understand. I think one I'd maybe add is at least work towards providing content, right? Even if it's not perfect, even if it's not, that's an easy one that you can start, whether it's a blog, video, otherwise it's providing content that's relevant to your business, such that even if it's not perfect, you can at least start to generate it and then start to sock that money away such that when you are able to, or you have the budget to start to engage in SEO and you know that you need it and it's worthwhile to pursue. Well, as we wrap up, if you're to give kind of one last tip for people that are listening as to if they could only do one thing, if it was all they had the time for or the budget for as related to SEO, what would that one tip be?
Oh, guy, that's interesting. I'd say, get signed up with Search Console. That's Google's official SEO tool. That they'll tell you if there's errors on your website that you need to fix. They'll tell you how much search traffic you're getting, and that's just the best way to get started.
Hmm. Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to at least get started, at least start to become familiar with it, because and if you never get going, you're never going to reap the rewards. And it's one of those that if you kick down the road, eventually you're going to be or fall behind or otherwise need it for most businesses, unless, as you said, there are businesses that simply don't need it or don't need to engage with that. Well, as we wrap up, if people want to reach out to you, they want to find out more. They want to be a client, they want to be a customer, they want to be an employee, they want to invest in your business, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above. What's the best way to reach out and find out more?
Yeah, GaritBoothe.com. I have a strange spelling to my name, GaritBoothe, GaritBoothe.com, and you can find me there.
All right, well, awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out to Garit if you're looking for SEO, whether or not you need it, figuring out what that might entail, how to get it going, and how to engage with it. Definitely reach out to Garit. And I want to say thanks for coming on the podcast. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell or your own expertise that you want to share, feel free to go to inventiveguest.com and apply to be on the podcast. Two, also, if you're a listener, make sure to one, click subscribe in your podcast listener so you know when all of our awesome episodes come out. And two, leave us a review so new people can find out about the podcast as well. Last but not least, if you ever need help with your patents, trademarks, or anything else with your business, reach out to us at Miller IP Law by going to strategymeeting.com. Thanks again, Garit, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Devin.